Everyone in the village called him lazy, but nobody knew what was happening inside his mind. Ethan lived with his mother in a house at the edge of a village. Every morning, while other young men carried baskets, repaired fences, and worked in the fields, Ethan sat beneath a tree, watching the clouds and searching for ways to avoid work. His neighbors noticed. "That boy will never become anything," they whispered. His mother worried about him. She knew Ethan was not foolish. In fact, he was clever. When a tool broke, Ethan could sometimes repair it faster than anyone else. When a difficult task appeared, he often noticed a simpler way to solve it. But there was a problem. Ethan hated effort. Whenever something became uncomfortable, he searched for an easier path. His idea was clever, or he simply walked away. He had dreams of building a better life, earning enough money to help his mother, and becoming someone the village could respect. But dreams remained dreams because he rarely stayed with anything long enough to make them real. The more people called him lazy, the more he began to believe them. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was simply who he was. Ethan didn't know that an unexpected event was coming, one that would force him to confront something more important than the villagers' opinions. It would force him to discover whether he was truly lazy, or whether he had never found a reason strong enough to make him try. Ethan woke late each morning. While the village was already busy, he was still in bed, telling himself he would get up soon. When his mother asked him to help in the fields, he usually answered the same way. "I'll do it later." But later rarely came. He would begin repairing a fence and leave it unfinished. He would promise to clean the tools and forget. He would start learning something new, become frustrated, and abandon it. Each unfinished task made the next easier to avoid. At first, Ethan did not care what people said about him. When the villagers called him lazy, he laughed. Their opinions seemed unimportant. Then something changed. He heard the word so often that it slowly became part of the way he saw himself. Lazy. Maybe they were right. Maybe he simply wasn't the kind of person who could work hard. Maybe successful people were simply different. Maybe trying was pointless if he would always give up. This is how a habit can become an identity. There is a difference between saying, "I am avoiding work today," and saying, "I am a lazy person." The first describes a behavior. The second begins to define the person. Ethan started protecting that identity. When something became difficult, quitting felt natural because it confirmed his belief. Then there was Noah. Noah was Ethan's age, but he woke before sunrise every morning. He worked in the fields, learned new skills, and never seemed afraid of difficult tasks. People respected him. "Look at Noah," the villagers would say. "He works every morning. Why can't you be like him?" Ethan felt ashamed whenever he heard those words. Yet shame did not make him stronger. It made him want to hide. Then one morning, his mother became sick. She could no longer work. For the first time, Ethan's choices would affect someone else. The fields needed attention. The household needed food. He could no longer say, "I'll do it later." Ethan had spent years avoiding difficult work. Now life was about to give him a problem he could not walk away from. By the following week, Ethan's mother became too weak to work. The small farm that had once seemed ordinary suddenly looked enormous. The crops needed water. The animals needed food. A broken fence needed repair. There was little money in the house, and every day brought another problem. At first, Ethan tried to escape the responsibility. He told himself that a neighbor might help, a relative might arrive, or somehow the situation would solve itself. But morning came and nobody came. The fields did not wait. Hungry animals did not wait. Life did not wait. For the first time, Ethan understood something he had spent years avoiding. Nobody was coming to save him. He walked into the field and tried to work. Within an hour, his back hurt and his hands felt weak. He dropped a tool, made mistakes, and struggled with tasks that other villagers could finish without thinking. From the road, he heard quiet voices. "Let's see how long the lazy boy lasts." The words hurt more than his tired muscles. Part of Ethan wanted to throw the tool down and prove them right. Maybe they were right. Maybe he really was lazy. Maybe this was simply who he was. That evening, Ethan sat outside the house alone. The sky was dark and the village had become quiet. He thought about all the times he had said, "Tomorrow." Tomorrow he would start working. Tomorrow he would finish what he began. Tomorrow he would become different. But tomorrow had never arrived. It had only moved farther away, carrying months and years with it. Then Ethan looked through the window and saw his mother sleeping. Her face looked tired but peaceful. She had spent years working for him, believing there was something good inside the boy everyone else had already judged. Something changed inside Ethan. He did not suddenly become strong. He did not feel motivated. He simply understood that his reason was bigger than his excuses. He looked toward the dark field and whispered, "Tomorrow, I will wake before sunrise. I will finish one job before I allow myself to quit." It was a small promise, but for Ethan, it was the first promise he had made to his future and meant to keep. Before sunrise, while the village was still sleeping, Ethan opened his eyes. For a moment, the old voice inside him said, "Stay in bed." This time, he stood up. Everyone in the village had already decided what kind of person Ethan was. They called him lazy, careless, and incapable of finishing anything. But now, standing beside the enormous stone, Ethan was beginning to wonder whether the real problem had never been his ability. Maybe it had been his habit of giving up before discovering what he could do. The stone barely moved. Ethan pushed harder. His feet slipped against the dry ground and pain traveled through his arms. Around him, the other contestants struggled with the same task. Some pushed with all their strength. Others shouted encouragement to themselves. The villagers watched silently, waiting to see who would succeed. Ethan stepped back and looked at the stone again. He remembered the first challenge. He had not carried the heavy load with his strength. He had found a better way. During the second challenge, he had not rushed across the broken bridge. He had stopped, observed, and used what was available. So why was he trying to defeat this stone, with the one thing he had always lacked? Strength. Ethan walked around it slowly. Then he noticed something others had missed. The ground beside the stone was slightly lower, creating a natural slope. Nearby, several fallen logs lay beside the field. An idea appeared. He dragged one log toward the stone, then another. His hands trembled from exhaustion, but he kept working. He placed the logs beneath the stone, creating a simple rolling path. Then he found a strong wooden pole and positioned it carefully against the stone. The villagers began whispering. "What is he doing?" Ethan pushed down on the pole. Nothing happened. He adjusted its position. Again he pushed. This time the stone moved. Only a little. But it moved. Ethan froze for a moment, almost unable to believe it. Then he pushed again. The stone rolled onto the first log. The crowd became completely silent. Ethan continued. One log moved forward. He repositioned it. Then another. Slowly, painfully, the enormous stone began traveling across the field. The strongest contestants had tried to overpower it. Ethan had learned to work with it. And as the stone moved closer to the finish point, something else was changing too. For years, Ethan had believed that being different meant being weak. He had allowed the village's opinion to become his own opinion. Every time someone called him lazy, he had felt less capable. Every unfinished task had become evidence that they were right. But now he was discovering another truth. A person can have bad habits without being a bad person. A person can waste years without wasting the rest of their life. The villagers were no longer laughing. They were watching. And Ethan, for the first time, wasn't working to prove them wrong. He was working because he had finally discovered someone worth proving himself to. Himself. The stone crossed the final line, and for a moment nobody said anything. Then the village erupted in applause. Ethan stood beside the stone, breathing heavily, his clothes covered in dust, his hands shaking from exhaustion. He looked toward the crowd and saw something he had almost forgotten how to imagine. Respect. The same people who had laughed at him were now cheering. Even the village leader looked surprised. Ethan had won. The prize was enough to repair several parts of his family's farm, buy food, replace broken tools, and help his mother. But strangely, the money was not what Ethan remembered most. He remembered the moment the stone first moved. That tiny movement had changed something inside him. For years, Ethan had believed that he was simply a lazy person. When work became difficult, he escaped. When people criticized him, he accepted their judgment. When a task seemed too hard, he told himself that he was not capable. But now he understood something. He had not proved that he was never lazy. He had proved that laziness did not have to remain his identity. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. Nobody forced him. There was no competition, no crowd, no prize. He remembered the promise he had made to himself. He finished one difficult task before allowing himself to rest. Then another. Slowly his habits changed. When work became difficult, he no longer immediately searched for an escape. Instead, he asked himself, what is the easiest way to solve this problem without avoiding the work? That question became his habit. Ethan did not suddenly begin loving hard work every minute. Some mornings he still felt tired. Some days he wanted to quit. The difference was that he stopped treating those feelings as instructions. One afternoon, an older villager approached him. "We were wrong about you," the man said quietly. Ethan smiled. "Maybe you were," he answered, "but I was also wrong about myself." That was the real victory. The competition had given Ethan money, but the experience had given him something far more valuable: evidence. Evidence that he could begin. Evidence that he could continue. Evidence that one decision could challenge an identity he had carried for years. And sometimes, that is how change begins. Not when everyone else believes in you, but when you finally decide to stop believing the worst things you have been told about yourself. Ethan began to understand that people call someone lazy because they see what happens outside. They see a person avoiding work, arriving late, or giving up easily. They do not always see what is happening underneath. Sometimes laziness grows from a lack of purpose. Sometimes it comes from fear of failure, comfort, poor habits, or the belief that effort will not change anything. Sometimes a person has never found a reason to make change necessary. But understanding the reason is not an excuse. It is the beginning of defeating the problem. Ethan could see the difference between his old behavior and the person he wanted to become. Old Ethan said, "I'll do it tomorrow." New Ethan said, "I'll do one small thing today." Old Ethan waited for motivation. New Ethan learned to act before motivation arrived. Old Ethan saw difficulty as a reason to escape. New Ethan began seeing difficulty as evidence that he was growing stronger. That change did not happen in one morning. It happened through repeated decisions, one task finished, one promise kept, one difficult moment faced instead of avoided. Maybe someone has called you lazy too. Maybe you have heard it so many times that you have started saying it to yourself. But having lazy habits does not mean you are permanently a lazy person. Your past behavior can explain where you are. It does not decide where you go. You do not need to transform your life today. You need to prove through one action that you can choose differently. Then do it again tomorrow. Identity is not built by what you say about yourself. It is built by what you repeatedly do. Ethan once believed his story had already been written. Then he discovered that every promise kept gave him another chance to rewrite it. What have you been postponing? What goal have you abandoned because someone told you that you were not capable? And perhaps more importantly, have you heard that label so many times that you have started believing it yourself? Maybe someone called you lazy. Maybe they said you would never succeed. Maybe you failed once, twice, or even many times, and eventually decided that trying was pointless. But you do not need to become a completely different person tomorrow. You only need to take one action. Read one page, finish one lesson, complete one workout, practice one difficult skill, do one important task before you reach for your phone. Because confidence does not always come before action. Very often, it happens in the opposite direction. Action creates evidence. Evidence creates confidence. Confidence strengthens your identity, and that stronger identity makes the next action easier. If you are learning English, do not wait until you feel ready. Read one page even if you understand only most of it. Learn 5 new words. Listen for 10 minutes. Speak even when your grammar is not perfect. Make mistakes, correct them, and try again. Every small action becomes evidence. Evidence that you are changing. Evidence that you can keep a promise to yourself. Evidence that you are no longer the person who always says, "I'll start tomorrow." You do not have to prove yourself to every person who doubted you. You do not need an argument, an announcement, or a dramatic transformation. Let people call you lazy if they want. You do not have to argue with them. Change quietly, work consistently. Take one step today, another tomorrow, and another after that. Eventually, the person you become will answer the question for you. Because the strongest proof is not what you say about yourself. It is what your life can no longer hide. Keep learning, keep practicing, keep growing. And most importantly, stop waiting for tomorrow to become the person you could start becoming today.